I've lived in Fareham for 25 years, which means I must have passed the war memorial out there 10,000 times. One day I stopped and looked, and that wall of names carved in stone, each one of them represents a man or a woman from a local family. Ordinary Fareham people who walk these streets, perhaps even sat in this church. And each individual loss must have sent a ripple effect of grief and sadness right through the families, friends and neighbours. This inspired me to research the War Memorial and the Hampshire Regiment and to find out more about these people. I've read some horrific tales of gas attacks and suicidal missions across no man's land under heavy machine gun fire. Stories that really focus the mind on what actually happened 100 years ago. By reading about these ordinary men, they were no longer just names. They were soldiers, but they were also shopkeepers, farm workers, husbands, brothers, fathers. They were the sons of our town. And when I looked down the list of those lost, something leapt out at me. Sergeant Charles Bannell. He and several others lived in my road, and that connection made World War I something that would have affected all of us had we lived in a different era. He left his house less than a mile from here, but he and many others never came home. So I decided to go and find some of them. I travelled to the Somme and Ypres earlier this year, retracing the steps of some of the men remembered in stone outside. Sergeant Bannell was killed in the spring of 1915, aged just 23. His body was never found. He may well be one of the thousands of unmarked graves, the soldiers of the Great War, or he may have been lost completely in the carnage and chaos of the battlefield shelling. His name is on the Menin Gate. I made sure I went and found him. I retraced his final journey from Paxton Road to Ypres. I found others too, men from Fareham who fought for our freedom and were laid to rest in foreign fields. And as war raged in Europe, here in Fareham the church was looked after by Reverend Arnold. We've also managed to piece together some of his story. The likelihood is that he will have spent much of wartime comforting bereaved families, even though, as well as being a vicar, he was a father who lost 2 sons. So he had to deal with his own grief while supporting the community. And when peacetime came, he was the man who dedicated the War Memorial outside the front of this church, that same piece of stone that inspired my journey. I also visited areas where the Hampshire Regiment served. One particular cemetery near Ypres was especially poignant. In August 1916 the regiment suffered heavy losses in a horrific night of gas attacks. Those Hampshire men are buried in 2 neat rows together just off a main road next to farmland in an area known as Potager Woods. I also visited Poppering, and even among the carnage of war this town had a darker side. John Bennett was a young Hampshire Regiment soldier whose military record showed that he had disciplinary issues before he even left Gosport. He was reprimanded and charged on several occasions for misconduct. By the time he got to Belgium it became apparent that fighting was beyond him. He had neither the skills nor the stomach for warfare. His court-martial reads as if he was a frightened boy who suddenly found himself being shelled and gassed as death and chaos rained down around him. One night he went missing during a bombardment. It appeared that he had run away, petrified. His commanding officer pleaded his case, but on a summer morning in 1916, Private Bennett was shot at dawn. At 19 years old he was the only member of the Hampshire Regiment executed during the Great War. In Poppering there are many graves of executed men, some professional soldiers, some conscripts from all over the Commonwealth, as young as 17. Because of the efforts of the people like those listed on our war memorial here, thankfully my generation's courage was never tested to its limit when we were 17. But the main subject of this exhibition are the graves and memorials of local men that I managed to find in France and Belgium. Hopefully by sharing these photos we can find out more about them, maybe build a story of the lives behind the names, but above all we can make sure that those men who acted with such bravery 100 years ago will still be remembered 100 years from today.